now my great privilege to have our next guest with us today, Governor Sam Brownback. Governor Brownback has spent his life in service to others. He was born in Garnett, Kansas, and raised on the Lynn County family farm where his mother and father still live. At Prairie View High School, Sam was elected state president of FFA. His interest in public service continued as he attended Kansas State University, which during his senior year at K-State, Sam served as student body president. After graduation, Sam decided to attend law school at the University of Kansas, where he was at his class president before completing his law degree in 1982. Sam met his wife Mary while they were both in law school. They have been married 28 years and have 5 children. In 1986, Sam became the state's youngest secretary of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. During his stint as Ag Secretary, he also served as a White House Fellow in the first Bush administration. That's enough. That's enough.
So serious in the discussion earlier. I think a group of insurance agents, you guys all like to tell stories and jokes, and it seems so serious in here. I know Jay, I came in there and I didn't know if he had a new joke or not for me. I was pitching. You don't have any for me?
No, we're going now.
Oh, okay. I was hitting the guy that was helping me get here. I said, "Do you know any new stories?" And he said, "Well, I called my son up and he had one." He said, "Why did the lion spit out the clown?" And I said, "I don't know. It tasted funny." All right, I won't try the next one. Well, actually, I am going to try this next because I think this one's funny if I do it right. So this guy's walking across the road. All right, he's just starting to walk across the road, and there's this car coming down the street. The car's coming right at him. So he just stops and he then pivots back the other way. Thinking, I'm going to get out of the way of the car. The car starts angling back towards him, so he stops again and goes back the other way again, and the car comes back towards him again. So he just freezes in the road, stands right there. Car comes right up next to him, swerves at the last minute, stops right beside him, rolls down the window. It's a squirrel driving the car, and he says, "See, it's harder than you think." What do you think? I used to tell lawyer jokes all the time. Can't tell those anymore, you know. I mean, and then I had a friend of mine years ago. When I was Ag Secretary. He was from Wisconsin, which is in everybody's news view right now. He was the Ag Secretary there, and he'd go out night after night and he'd tell these Ole and Lena stories. You guys, maybe you're familiar with Ole and Lena stories. And so his legal counsel came to him one day and said, look, I know you speak night after night, you're in rural Wisconsin and all this stuff, but you cannot tell Ole these stories because it's an ethnic group, and somebody's going to get offended, and they're going to sue you and sue us, and we're going to lose. So you can't tell these stories. And the guy said, well, look, I'm giving speeches every night. I got to tell some story around here. People are going to get really bored. And the guy said, well, tell them on a civilization that no longer exists, like Mesopotamia. You know, so he went out that night and said, okay, there's these 2 Mesopotamians, Ole and Lena. That's a good way. You can go at it that way. Maybe I can start doing that. I just want to make a couple of comments and then open up for questions and thoughts that you might have, because each of you, the number of people in this room, I know you're very involved in your community. I appreciate it. Some of you run for statewide office recently. David has seen you, and you've been very active and involved. We've got a very serious time in the country. Well, I've started off telling stories. It's just not a storytelling time. We got a $500 million budget deficit I'm staring at in 2012 for Kansas. This is after 3 years of a deficit, and this is after raising taxes last year. Remember last year, raising the 1-cent sales tax is going to fix everything? And I'm looking at a $500 million deficit. We have a structural spending problem in America's public sector. America's public sector has a structural spending problem. It goes throughout the system. It's local, state, and federal. So you're seeing local units of government saying, okay, how are we going to fix this? You're seeing state units of government saying, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to fix the pension system, which is a big part of the fight that's taking place in Wisconsin. So I understood that the hotel here is offering the Wisconsin state legislators protection for room and board. They're going to charge them a lot for it, though. But that's part of the discussion that's taking place now, because we have these very generous public benefit systems that the private sector's walked completely away from a defined benefit system, saying you can't fund it. And that's part of the discussion. And then in Washington, it is totally out of control on the size and scale of the debt. We're right close to 90% debt to GDP at the federal level, which means that we've got about a $14 trillion economy in the country each year, and we've got about a $12 trillion deficit if you count the total debt. And unfortunately, too, with that, a lot of that debt is owned by one of our major competitors, which is China, who then can threaten back us, saying, look, we're not going to pay any more of this debt if you guys don't quit messing around in Sudan or here or there, and it really represents a limitation on us. We have got to get this under control, and you're now starting to see the initial engagement of the discussion in a true fashion on the structural spending deficit, or structural spending problem we have. That's what you're starting to see taking place. That's what you're starting to see taking place in Wisconsin. That's what you're starting to see take place here. We discussed what can we do on CAPERS, the Public Employees Retirement System here. I talked to Dave Kerr, who was president of the Kansas Senate, for a while. Some of you would know Dave, about his ideas on CAPERS, good financial guy. He said, you know, we fixed that twice. But the issue is, yes, we fixed it twice, but people generally tend to live longer, and then you didn't have the performance of your savings that you wanted to have. It's a structural issue, and you got to start addressing the structure of it. And that's what we're doing here at the state level. I pulled off 2,000 state full-time equivalent positions in this budget proposal, took 2,000 out. Now these were positions that had been open for a period of time. So instead of just saying we're going to refill them at all, we just took them off the board, eliminated 8 state agencies. Now the legislature may put some of those back in. We are looking at various ways of what we can get out of as a state government, saying we can no longer afford to do this. We're going to do our core functions well, but if they're ancillary to core functions, then there's some of these things we just can't afford to do anymore. I'd love to do them, but we have got to get our structural spending down. We've got to have a discussion about K-12 financing, because that's half of my state general fund budget, is how we finance local schools. And we started in that discussion on suitability and defining that by the legislature instead of the courts. I don't want the courts to solve the K-12 education problems. The courts shouldn't solve this problem. This is a legislative problem because it's a financing problem, and the legislature's constitutional duty is to figure out how we spend our money. Under the Constitution, that's who's supposed to do it. It's the legislature, not the courts. So I'm saying let's get the courts out of this piece of it. Let's say we're going to have a real talk about this. But it's half your budget. You ought to have a real talk about it. And there's going to be a lot of back and forth and stewing and everything, but this is the sort of thing we're going to have to do. On the federal level, and to me, this is the most daunting single fact of the whole thing at the federal level, is this next statistic. Half of the American households receive an entitlement check from the federal government. Half of the American households receive an entitlement check from the federal government. Now we can talk about a whole lot of things, cutting discretionary spending, cutting military, this and that, all of which we're going to need to do. There need to be pieces of all of that taking place. But at the core of your issue right now is an entitlement system that we can no longer sustain where we are. And demographics is destiny. Demographics is destiny. You know, what your population and your aging pool is doing is your destiny. And countries get old like people get old. So when that happens, then it starts, you know, people pulling out of the system instead of people in the system. And we've got the big baby boomer cohort that's just now hitting the entitlement, the major entitlement pool, which is Medicare and Social Security. Social Security is upside down for the second year in a row. It's supposed to go upside down until 2017. Medicare is even a more difficult problem. So we've just got to engage this. or our future doesn't look particularly good. On the other side of it, I think this country is fully capable of engaging these issues. I think the country is ready to engage these issues, and I think we're going to reward people that do engage these issues. Now it's going to be difficult, but we've got to solve these things, or I don't think our future looks particularly good. I think we can, and I think we will. But I hope you will be engaged as a group on what we do at your local level, what you do at your state level, and what we do at our federal level. Because this is critically important to us for the future of our nation, that we do it. You're going to see, it's kind of like two wrestlers at the first of a wrestling match right now taking place federally, where the Republican House of Representatives is engaging primarily the president, although it's a Democrat Senate is actually the first. And you've got two leverage points you're going to see this battle engage pretty quickly on. One is the spending for this next fiscal year, which the current appropriation for it, the bill for it, ends this next week. And so the House is saying, we're not going to put more money in without cuts. And the President could say, I'm not going to cut any further. And there could be a government shutdown taking place for a period of time with that. The second one is the debt ceiling. That ceiling needs to be raised. Given the trajectory we're currently on, that's going to take place in another month. And the House Republicans are saying, we're not raising the debt ceiling without cuts in spending. And that's a really serious one, because then if you don't raise your debt ceiling, you do have difficulties then issuing your, you can't raise your additional capital you need to run things. But unfortunately, you kind of got to get at those leverage points to get something decided, for something real to actually happen. And you're going to start seeing these being engaged. It's time. It needs to happen. We've got to figure it out. And I hope you'll be involved and active with it.